everybody. Welcome to the show. Around the nation right here. T with you, Nation. People all here with you. On this Thursday afternoon, we got a good show for you guys today. We're going to be talking about some fun stuff and some not fun stuff, as usual, as per the usual breakdown of what we've got going on today. For one, we've got some stuff. Yes, we still got some Russia stuff that we're going to talk about. We've got how Donald Trump knew that about what was happening with the elections. We also have a poll on how the American people feel about the summit. Then we're going to get away from that stuff, and we'll talk about, and you're going to love this. Now Republicans are saying the veterans' health care, we just can't afford it, guys. We just can't afford it. I've got that story. That is disaster. We have good news as well. We have the House Democrats doing something amazing. And then what we're going to do as well is we're going to talk about a Republican congressman who's running in a very, very contentious re-election campaign. We're going to revisit some of his comments. Fascinating. I wonder if these comments are going to help him or hurt him. Interesting. So that's what we've got today on the show. Hopefully you guys stay for the next hour because you're going to love these stories. I know I do. Also, if you guys could give us a like and a share. So especially if you share, sharing is like the best thing. You don't have to like it or not. You can even dislike it as long as you share. That's all I care about. Because really that helps us. That helps the show get out. So if you could do that, I would definitely appreciate it. You can also help out by using the super chat or even consider becoming a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation. Okay. All that fun stuff. Before I get into the stories, I just want to check and see what's going on as far as trending news is. Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Okay. Fun times. Okay. So let's get into the stories then. We'll start out with something fun. I like fun. I like tacos. Okay. So what do you get when you search the internet for idiot? Well, it turns out you'll get the President of the United States of America. I'm not actually kidding. This is a real thing that's going on. In fact, apparently users of the internet have been gaming Google's search algorithm into having images of Donald Trump show up when somebody searches for the word idiot. Now, I was kind of curious if this was true. It was like, oh, come on. No, there's no way. No. It's true. I did it myself. You guys can do it too. The results were across the board. For the first 10, 15 images, all pictures of Donald Trump. Oh, one picture is notable. This is for the woman that called Piers Morgan an idiot. That is also awesome. Now, according to The Guardian, this whole thing began as an effort when British protesters used the Green Day hit American Idiot as the anthem for their demonstrations during Trump's recent visit to the UK. Now, they also awesomely used a giant baby Trump blimp. Hilarious. Now, afterwards, more users are taking advantage of that online association by upvoting a picture of Donald Trump and the word idiot on Reddit. So, thank you, Redditors. You guys are awesome. Now, Business Insider reported that many English articles about the campaign published last week had also included the word American idiot in their headlines and featured Trump, and featured images of Trump. Now, look, what that does is that, of course, when news reports on things, it ends up also messing with search results. So all those things combined, the upvotes and the headlines, this video will also help that which is also fun. And that's kind of how it works. Although Google wants to make sure that nobody really knows quite how the algorithm works. But apparently some people have figured out how to influence it. Anyway, now, as you can see, this can be used to hilarious effect, as in this case, or to get serious for a minute, it also can be used for terrible effects. For example, back in 2009, users found image searches for Michelle Obama ended up bringing up a racist photo of a monkey with earrings. So, it can be bad. It can be good. It can also be bad. So, of course, that's just kind of the nature of the internet. But at least in this day and age, internet users have done something positively wonderful. So, now, let me go back to before we end the segment. I want to give you a quote from Google here. This is back from 2009 when the negative stuff came up about Michelle Obama. They said, sometimes Google search results from the internet can include disturbing content, even from innocuous queries. We assure you that the views expressed by such sites are not in any way endorsed by Google. Search engines are a reflection of the content and information that is available on the internet. Now, in this case, all the content and information is basically saying Donald Trump is a fucking idiot. Awesome. A site's ranking in Google search results relies heavily on computer algorithms, using thousands of factors to calculate a page's relevance to a given query. The beliefs and preferences of those who work at Google, in case you were wondering, as well as the opinions of the general public, do not determine or impact our search results. So right-wingers can't go and say, oh my God, it's a conspiracy from Google to make our president look like an idiot. No, he does that all on his own. I can assure you it was a tremendous effort that has borne fruit. And I'm talking not just about the Redditors and people pushing this, but also Donald Trump himself, who is the OG pusher of the Trump is an idiot meme. Just saying. So while this is fun and is backed up by what I've seen about Trump, it's not always a good thing to game the algorithm. But in this case, hats off, if I wore hats, to you guys on the internet for, again, making my day. Thank you. Just a little bit of fun. Okay, moving on. Okay. So now that there's been some time since the Helsinki summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, as the Russian president, Americans have pretty much allowed the news of what happened to sink in over the last few days. So in case you're wondering how the American people are feeling about this summit, whether they're optimistic or they're happy the way the president of the United States conducted himself around a possible foreign adversary, or at least a very powerful foreign leader whom we're not on the best terms with, well, we have a poll just for you guys. Now, let me give you the results of that. Apparently, only about a third of Americans, when asked if they approved the way Donald Trump handled his summit with Putin, only about a third of Americans approved. That's 32%. Not very good. So, very, very sad. Now, that's among that's among American voters. Now, Republican voters specifically, well, how did they feel about this? Well, they thought it was a winner. 68% of Republicans approved of the way that Donald Trump had basically made himself subservient in front of the Russian leader. But wait a minute. I thought you guys cared about strength. I thought you liked Donald Trump because he was going to be strong. He's going to be strong against foreign leaders. Well, you might need to take a little bit of a position of strength towards a leader that kind of influenced our elections or had attempted to hack our elections. Just saying. But no. As far as them subservience to Putin goes, well, they love that. They're like, yes, Putin. God, we love that guy. Well, there actually might be a really good reason why many on the right, especially Trump supporters, are fans of Vladimir Putin and think this went swimmingly. Now, let me go to more results here before we get back to that. Most Americans, about 70%, believe U.S. intelligence assessments that Russia interfered in the elections. The Republicans are more skeptical. Just half say they believe the U.S. intelligence, while 9 in 10 Democrats do. Well, so here's the strange thing about this. 68% of Republicans approve of the way that Donald Trump did not confront Vladimir Putin with the results of the intelligence agency's findings. And yet, just half say they believe in the intelligence. So, yes, there's a significant majority of Republicans that are like, yeah, they meddled in the election. And at the same time, they're like, whatever you do, don't confront Putin about it. We think you're doing a fantastic job saying that it was not Putin or that it was not Russia. It could have been other people. I don't see any reason why it would be Russia. Although, of course, later on, he did say, I misspoke. I totally misspoke. I mean, that's not what I said, even though I absolutely said it. Yeah, okay, man. More Americans see President Trump as too friendly toward Russia than they did last year. This is largely due to an increase in the number of Democrats and independents who say so. More than 3 in 4 Republicans think the president has the right balance of friendliness versus unfriendliness towards Russia. Now, look, friendly versus unfriendly. Okay, so here's the thing, right? Now, if you're going to do diplomacy, which I believe in, you don't necessarily have to be friendly, but it all depends on your definition of friendly, right? So, for example, allowing them to get away with, and not meaning this in a context of let's bomb them, right? But allowing to get away with no consequences for their attempt to basically wreck our democracy. Well, I mean, that's too friendly, right? Again, you don't want to go in with guns blazing or launch missiles or anything like that. No, there's no launch the missiles going on here, okay? Let's not do that. I'm not in favor of that. But there's got to be some sort of consequence, whether it be an economic consequence, which I think is probably the best sort of consequence that we can do. Economic sanctions. Or, making sure that they're unable to sell certain commodities or sell fossil fuels. Hey, that'd be great. And maybe we could steer our world towards more renewables. That would be fantastic. But anyway. Again, diplomacy. I believe in diplomacy, and what we saw during the summit was not diplomacy. I think it was, the case of a monkey giving another monkey his banana as a show of dominance. But anyway, now let me get to more of them. Now, Republicans also hold relatively more positive views of Russia than Democrats do, as has been the case since Donald Trump was elected. More Republicans call Russia at least friendly or an ally compared to the U.S. compared to Americans overall. Now, again, I talked about how there's a little bit of a reason. Now, why is that? Well, just to give you a little bit of a quick synopsis, after the fall of communism in Russia, when it ceased being the USSR, they took a massively rightward turn. So some of the fathers of the modern conservative movement, including Paul Weyrich and some of the other right-wing evangelical Christian leaders, actually started going and cultivating relationships with people in Russia. Why? In order to turn them, of course, into a Christian state. Hey, look, there are these white people who are nationalistic, Russian nationals, and they might be open to Christianity, and especially since they have an Orthodox church there, a Christian Orthodox church. So that's what they did. They went and met with high-ranking Russian officials and began cultivating personal relationships in order to build a religious foundation. So here you have American right-wing Christians and then cultivating relationships with now right-wing Russian Christians. So they have this relationship, and of course, that comes down to even the prayer breakfast, which I was reading an article in the New York Times about that prayer breakfast and how that relates to the recent Russian spy or alleged Russian spy that had been arrested, whose name was unsealed from the 12 Mueller indictments of Russians who helped interfere in the election and things like that. So that prayer breakfast, of course, has been sort of an outgrowth of the Christian conservative nationalist movement in America. And again, they reached out to, and it's not just Russian, they reached out to people in other countries in order to build these relationships as well. And so that's why you have people on the right that actually are very favorable towards Russia, because what Russia is living in now is sort of that Christian right-wing nationalist autocracy that they've always really enjoyed and they've always really wanted here in America. So that sort of explains that. Okay. Anyway, let's go further on this. Now, majority of Americans also expressed at least some concern about Russia interfering in the 2018 elections. In fact, there was a piece of legislation that was a call to protect our elections, to make them a little bit more difficult for foreign hackers or even domestic hackers to be able to change results or get into voter databases. You know what the Republicans did? They voted that down. So they voted down a bill to send funding to the states in order to protect and secure our elections. Huh. Fascinating. I'm just saying. Why would you not want to protect our elections? I thought you cared about election security. Now, you really care if somebody who's an undocumented immigrant supposedly goes to vote. But not protecting, but they don't care if another country, it doesn't matter what the country is, tries to hack into our elections or will attempt to. Fantastic. Well, we know where they stand on that. So now, as far as how to approach Russia, right? Now, most Americans, and I like this. This is a really good piece of the poll. More are in favor of diplomatic pressure over dialogue and cooperation. So none of this suggests that, hey, maybe we should go to war with Russia to punish them. No, that's a ridiculous take. That's one of the worst liberal hot takes I've ever seen. Right? No, we should not go to war with a nuclear power. What we should do is, yes, I believe we should use a mixture of diplomatic pressure and dialogue with the Russian, nation. More so, I think, diplomatic pressure, because, look, I think that we need to respond with that kind of strength. Sort of a strong stance. Again, not advocating for a military stance. There is a difference, but a strong stance and a strong rebuke of what Russia had actually done to our elections. So I think I'm basically with the majority of Americans here saying we should do some diplomatic pressure, because this is unacceptable, what happened in our elections, and we should not allow it to happen again. So that's the poll. Very interesting findings here. Overall, people are not happy with President Trump and his handling of the Russia situation, except for Republicans, which, of course, Republicans love everything that Donald Trump is doing, despite the fact that he contradicts himself and lies pretty much all the time. So there you have it. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take a tiny break. We'll come back. We will do some more stuff, including the recent New York Times report showing how President Trump knew about the Russian effort to meddle in our elections. This is before taking office. An amazing report. We'll come back with that, and then we've got other stuff to cover right here around the nation. So if you haven't already, please hit the share button. And also, I'm going to read your super chats when I come back. So if you have them, please send them. All right. Be right back. Around the Nation. Welcome back to the show. Run the Nation right here, TWT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We have a super chat here from Elwell. She asks for me to comment on the House Judiciary Committee, led by the GOP, are now holding, wait for it, can I get a classified meeting on Hillary's emails today. The timing, I think, was off on that, but really? Is this what we're doing? We are holding classified meetings, not on Russian attempts to attack our democracy, but on Hillary's emails. For fuck's sakes, Hillary's in the woods, and she can stay in the woods, right? And if she runs... okay, so there's this... I don't know. There's this idea some people have that she's going to run in 2020. She's going to run in 2020. I doubt it. And if she does, she'll get crushed. Nobody wants Hillary Clinton again. If you look, you want Trump? That's how you get Trump. You run Hillary. No, she needs to go back to the woods and stay there and not be involved in politics. But again, here we have another, I think, attempt for by Republicans to be like, look, Hillary's emails. We're having another one. At this point, look, here's the thing. So there's a lot of discussion here, and I think this is important, right? So there's discussion from some of my colleagues that are like, hey, you know, we should not run on the Russia issue. I actually agree with that, right? I think that's stupid. Running on Russia is a terrible campaign strategy. So it's a terrible campaign strategy to run on that. We should not. We should run on Medicare-for-all. We should run on issues. So conversely, this is what I see the Republicans doing by holding another thing, right? So Republicans are running on Hillary's emails. But Hillary Clinton's not running. Hillary Clinton is not relevant. She doesn't matter anymore. There's nothing there. But this is like, I don't know. This is like bait for Republicans. This is bait for right wingers. This is bait for people who just despise the hell out of Hillary Clinton. And it's tiring. Why should we be wasting time on doing more of these classified hearings about emails? Come on, man. You've got to be kidding. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of effort. But again, that's their campaign strategy. We're going to run on tax cuts, which are deeply unpopular. And then, we're going to run on Hillary's emails. It's as dumb as Democrats running on Russia. How about we run on actual issues? Now, progressives, we actually have an advantage because we actually are great on the issues. We have great issues. In fact, I got a story later on about the Medicare-for-all caucus. That is an amazing story. And I'm looking forward to talking about that. We should run on policy, not on this stuff. Even if it's important, still shouldn't run on it. But anyway, that's my thoughts on that. It's pretty ridiculous. Okay, moving on. One more story here on that. So there's a new report out that shows that Donald Trump had actually previously known about the Russian attempts to meddle in the 2016 election. Now, the New York Times reported that before his inauguration, then President-elect Trump was told that Russian President Vladimir Putin had personally ordered complex cyber attacks to attempt to sway the 2016 election. So those cyber attacks, of course, included trying to get into the voter database, which he was unsuccessful at, and failing, of course, to get into any of the machines that changed the vote, but also included things like Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, memes, infiltrating certain groups, etc., etc. Now, Trump was shown that information, which included evidence that included information gathered from a top-secret source close to President Putin, which outlined their entire plan. Now, when showed that information, according to the report, which cited multiple people who attended the briefing, Trump sounded, quote, grudgingly convinced. I mean, I guess. Sure. Why grudgingly? Well, think about it this way, right? I think the reason that President Trump is so unconcerned about this is because this ties in with his ego. The whole idea that the Russian government had cyber attacks in place would make his election seem illegitimate. Now, that is one thing President Trump cannot stand the idea of. No, what are you talking about? I won bigly. I put crooked Hillary. Yeah, okay, you did. Because of the Electoral College. Hashtag dismantle the Electoral College. Not because of that, but I think this is the second, maybe third time that the Electoral College has actually taken a win from the popular vote winner and gave it to the popular vote loser. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. But again, I know we're a constitutional republic, blah, blah, blah. Right. Anyway, he doesn't want to admit this because, oh my God, it hurts my feelings. But it makes me seem like an illegitimate president. Well, I got news for you. Probably about half the American people, or at least half the voting public, already think you're an illegitimate president. And by the way, this is a lot like, in a way, President Obama, whom a lot of Republicans believed was an illegitimate president. Although they based that on as he's a Kenyan Muslim socialist. from Kenya. And then he had to go back in time or something to change his birth certificate or tell someone to change his birth certificate, etc. Okay, sure. Now, the thing is, right? Okay. So the Russians did not change votes, as I mentioned, right? Now, they attempted to access voter data, as I mentioned as well. They did social media, memes, fake news stories. They infiltrated Facebook groups. They even tried to infiltrate Sanders-aligned Facebook groups, and I have several admins from some of those Facebook groups that admit that were like, yes, some of us were even kicked out by people who had infiltrated and started posting, fake news stories about Hillary Clinton. So now here's the thing about that, right? So did that have a huge impact on the election? I've said before, Hillary Clinton's election, her campaign died a death of 1,000 cuts, right? And one of the reasons is that she was already so widely disliked by potential voters, it largely made the Russian effort kind of moot because people already incredibly disliked her. There was also a lot of, legitimate things to dislike Hillary Clinton over. And yet the Russian and right-wing effort to smear her did come up with some of the most insane conspiracies, and they spread that, to be fair. Now, on Trump. Again, he's afraid of any notion that he did not legitimately win, which I can say, look, I don't like the Electoral College. I never have. But under those rules, he did legitimately win the presidency, even with Russian attempts. Again, no changing of the votes, but what they did was propaganda. Now, we've done that too to other countries, but I think we've done perhaps even more. Now, anyway, as I said before, you challenge his ego, he's going to ignore it. But at the meeting, which took place at Trump Tower, Trump was shown evidence that he at the time couldn't refute. Okay, sure, it happened. Now, that evidence included texts and emails from Russian military officers, as well as information gathered from a top secret source close to Putin, which outlined that their plan, as I mentioned before. Now, in the face of that evidence, the president had to admit that this happened. And then something changed. Now, what changed? Well, almost as soon as he took office, Mr. Trump began casting doubts on the intelligence on Russian election interference, though never taking issue with its specifics. And that's because he watched things like Sean Hannity and listened to all the Twitter trolls. He dismissed it broadly as a fabrication by Democrats and part of a witch hunt against him. But again, there is collusion and then there's Russian interference. Those two things do not necessarily have to be the same. Nonetheless, he raised unrelated issues, including the state of investigations into Hillary Clinton's server, to distract attention from the central question of Russia's role in who, if anyone, in Mr. Trump's immediate orbit may or may not have worked with them. Now, in July of 2017, just after meeting Mr. Putin for the first time, Trump told a New York Times reporter that the Russian president had made a persuasive case that Moscow's cyber skills were so good that the government hackers would never have been caught. That right there sounds like something that would definitely sway President Trump. No, what you talking about? No, our hackers are so good, Mr. Trump. They're so good, you would never have detected them. Ever. You know what I'm saying? They are that good. Oh, you know what? That's great. Yes. I like the way you think. That makes sense. Because Donald Trump's a simple person. Simple person, simple mind. And of course, it's all about, to him, winning. And it's all about being the best and being the greatest. And if you're the greatest, nobody could ever beat you and no one could ever challenge you. It's just an insight into how he works. And I thought it was kind of funny. But anyway. Now, therefore, Mr. Trump had concluded that Russia must not have been responsible. So again, I want to talk about conflation, right? So this is conflation with collusion and hacking. Now, one of the things, collusion, I can understand. He's like, I didn't do it. I didn't collude. I didn't do anything untoward. I didn't break the law. Everything I did was on the up and up. That's okay. He wants to make that case. He can certainly make that case because we don't have evidence of collusion. At least no concrete evidence of collusion. There's a lot of things that make you scratch your head and think, yeah, maybe there might be some collusion here, but you don't know. And that's the issue. That's why we have an investigation. But the conflation with collusion and with hacking, with him, there is no separate. It's all intertwined to him, which again tells you maybe something, right? So he thinks, no. This hacking, it wasn't Russia. It wasn't Russia. It couldn't be Russia. Well, it is. It happened according to evidence gathered by our intelligence agencies. And it's the collusion that is being investigated, likely because of all the other people around him and connected to him that wittingly or unwittingly worked with Russian sources, including a potential spy that has been arrested. Now, this alleged spy that we have in custody apparently used sex to infiltrate the right wing, including the NRA, and had been a guest at the National Prayer Breakfast. Now, why is that important? I mean, the National Prayer Breakfast is something that is kind of a weird tradition. But when you really read into it, it sounds like it shouldn't be. There should not be a thing. And the whole reason for it, this group that created it, that's also known creepily as the Family, they made it so that they could basically inject religion into politics. And of course, this somehow got to be a tradition among the White House, among the political elite. So now they go to this prayer breakfast. And it turns out this prayer breakfast, while it's also a good tool for recruiting into this religious group, the Family that puts on the prayer breakfast, it's also a good tool for Russians, very right-wing conservative Christian Russians who share the same kind of religious and political beliefs, to get along with American right-wing conservative Christians. Weird. It gets complicated, it gets messy, but it involves a lot of right-wing conservative figures going back into the 30s and 40s and 50s, even to the 70s, where you had Paul Weyrich, after the fall of the USSR, going over to Russia to try to spread more Christianity, more conservative evangelical type of Christianity. So, but anyway, look, the Christian right, and by the way, the Christian right meeting with the Christian right in America, meeting with the Christian right in Russia shouldn't be too big of a revelation, really, because they believe in the same kind of things. For example, the reason that Christian right-wingers here in America love Russia and consequently approve of Donald Trump's handling of Russia is because they have the same beliefs. They're the same. They like Putin and his anti-LGBT stances. They like the fact that they go after leftists, that they shut down the free press, and that, look, that he is basically an authoritarian. So it's not new. This isn't a new thing, right? The religious right loves the Russians love the religious right because they are the same. They have the same ideology. These are not left-wingers. They're not communists. So, you know, our fundamentalists and their fundamentalists are the same. But anyway, look, they wanted to make Russia more right-wing, more fundamentalist, more Christian. Now the Russians are doing the same thing, right? They want to make it more right-wing, more authoritarian, more religious. And guess what? They have their wish in Donald Trump. Whether or not he admits it. Okay. I think I spent way more than enough time on that topic. Moving on. Nope. Hold on here. Okay. So when Republicans passed their disastrous tax cuts for the rich, we warned you, right? So we warned you that they would soon turn around and claim that there's just no money for social programs and that we're going to have to start making some cuts if we wanted to afford things. Well, here we are. That has already happened. It's now being reported that the White House is warning Congress that the United States can no longer afford health care for veterans without certain cuts. You want to guess where those cuts are going to be? Well, better yet, I'll tell you. In a letter on Monday, the Trump administration demanded that lawmakers fund a popular veterans health care program, which allows former troops to spend public funds on private doctors and hospitals with cuts to other parts of the budget. Now, the other parts of that budget, which would, of course, end up being social programs, for example, Medicaid and food stamps. Wonderful. Now, here's the thing. This is another problem created by Donald Trump. Let me explain. Now, when Congress had passed the omnibus bill, that's a gigantic spending bill that comes through every once in a while, and it's something that both sides have to agree on some sort of compromise to make sure that they have their spending priorities straight. Veterans health care was actually put in the mandatory column of spending. So what there is that there's mandatory spending and then there's discretionary. Mandatory, of course, it always gets budgeted in there. Discretionary, not so much. So Donald Trump, though, last month had signed a law that reorganized veterans health care, which ended up shifting funding for the private program from the mandatory column into the discretionary column. Now, what that ended up doing, and this is the kind of weird accounting tricks they use on Capitol Hill, right? That ended up creating a virtual, not real, budget shortfall. So, oh, look at that. We're above our spending caps because of this healthcare program. Now, we're going to have to make cuts. We're going to have to cut Medicaid. We're going to have to cut food stamps. We're going to have to cut help for the poor in order to afford this veterans health care legislation. But you created the problem when you reorganized the veterans health care. You did that. It's not that it's spending more money. It's that you're using accounting tricks in order to make it so that you end up having to cut other programs. So this is a very, very stealth bullshit attack. This is why everybody hates politicians. But anyway, now, the obvious solution here would be to just, and this has been proposed by Democrats, just raise the budget cap. Raise the budget cap on discretionary spending. That's it. That's all you have to do. Well, that would be obvious. Republicans are like, no, we can't do that. We cannot raise the caps on discretionary spending because then we're going to spend more money. But you created the problem by taking a program that was into mandatory spending, which you already had budgeted out, and putting it in discretionary. What this does is effectively pits poor people versus veterans, right? Especially after Republicans had just passed tax cuts for the rich. Enormous. And that's what makes it sickening here, right? And as usual, the result of this is going to be the donors obviously win while someone, either the poor people or veterans, end up losing. Look, I thought the right wing cared about our veterans. I thought they cared about veteran spending. Now, I thought the whole purpose of this private, this ability for people in the VA to go to private doctors to help them, right? Well, you're not helping them when you're putting either that program versus another social program for poor people on the chopping block. No, you're using them as political leverage. That's what you're doing. Look, the right wing doesn't love veterans. You know what they love? They love sending people to war. War that helps their corporate friends. They don't give a shit about the broken men and women who come back from those wars that ended up making their friends in the defense industry incredibly rich. To them, those veterans are tools to be tossed aside unless they can use them for a political purpose. And in this point, the political purpose that they're using them for is to go after their dream of cutting food stamps. Which, by the way, ironically enough, you have both veterans and active service members that get paid so little, that have so little, that they also depend on food stamps. And let me just say how absurd that is, that with the over $700 billion we currently spend on the military each year, that our military recruits are on food stamps. That's insanity. That money doesn't go to our soldiers, doesn't go to the troops, doesn't go to the vets. It goes into the pockets of the defense contractors. That, of course, will circle it back to the politicians in the form of legalized bribes. It is a sick system. It is a gross system that we have. They don't care about troops. They never have cared about the troops. They certainly don't care about poor people. They don't care about veterans' health care. They don't care about health care at all. They don't care about anything other than enriching their corporate friends. And that's what it's always been about. Okay. All right. Let's move on to some good news. So, when I made that, ironically, I did not realize that that's the Democrats' new slogan. Oops. Sad. Anyway. Say hello to the Medicare-for-all caucus. So this is a brand new caucus for House Democrats that has been created in the wave of a lot of progressive challengers now coming into the House, as well as the general leftward lurch of the Democratic Party, which I think is great. Now, the caucus is expected to have over 60 founding members, and of course, it was announced earlier today. That's about a third of the 193 House Democrats, with more expected to sign on in the coming weeks, which is awesome. Now, the new Medicare-for-all caucus is basically returning to the idea of single-payer health insurance, right? So what they're doing is they're taking the legislation, H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare-for-all Act, and promoting it. And they're saying, this is what we're running on. Now, Keith Ellison, of course, is the main sponsor of that piece of legislation, taking over from the now retired and disgraced John Conyers. Now, look, John Conyers did a lot of terrible things as far as in his personal life, but when it came to legislation, and also when it came to civil rights, he had an amazing record. So H.R. 676 is a hell of a legacy, especially to lead. And, of course, a lot of these congressional Democrats, these House Democrats are saying that's the legacy that we want to sign on to. That's what we want to see getting pushed forward. Medicare for all. Now, the bill, of course, if you're not familiar with it, eliminates all private employer-based health plans and forces millions into a new government plan with no premiums or deductibles. Now, private insurers will still exist, but they will only provide supplemental insurance. So that virtually eliminates all private employer-based health plans. So again, if you have supplemental insurance, that will cover the things that Medicare for All does not cover. And I think those things are, mainly things like plastic surgery, or at least that's the way that I think that it should work. So this is an incredibly strong bill, a piece of legislation, and would do a lot of good for the American people. This is not, as some might have painted it as, a public option. It's not Medicare for, it's not Medicare X. This is true single payer. Now, the reason I point that out is that just like anything, you're going to have centrists that try to hijack the message and ride on the popularity of Medicare for all. Like there is, for example, one person running in Michigan to be the governor that doesn't quite necessarily know what Medicare for all actually means and says, oh, we should just expand Medicare, but then doesn't have very many details. Now, that, of course, is one of the so-called progressive candidates running for governor here in Michigan that was questioned by The Intercept on that. And Thandar had no idea. Like, oh, no, I'm going to expand Medicare. But that's not the same thing as single payer. Now, Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, who's running as the true progressive in that race, he already has his own plan. It's called Mishcare. So you might want to look that up. But anyway, centrists will hijack this message in order to ride the coattails on it and push for a public option. Now, look, a public option, it should have been something that we already had, because that is a more centrist idea. And it should have been a starting point, and it actually should have been inside of the ACA. However, thanks to people like Joe Lieberman, it is not inside the ACA. And so we ended up getting stuck with a completely non-public option system and something that's just run by private insurance. But look, public option, so think about it this way. Paul Krugman, right? So Paul Krugman is your consummate establishment insider. Paul Krugman is looking at Medicare X and looking at, public option plans, and he's like, that's not radical. The public option, that's not radical. That's what's radical, and I think it's in a good context. He might not view it in a good context, but I do. Would be Medicare for all, an actual single-payer government insurance that eliminates private insurance. That's what this is. But anyway, now Pramila Jayapal, who was talking about this in an interview, she said, this is the sea change from just 4 or 5 years ago, and people are more likely to see healthcare as a right. Now, she is, of course, she's a caucus co-chair, along with Representative Keith Ellison and Representative Debbie Dingell of Michigan. So, hey, Michigan represent. Now, she also says, the impetus for this caucus is to have a real discussion and work with our offices to see how a system would really work as we think about implementing it, right? So there is a good step. Now, she also says, it's about a growing movement to bring Medicare for all system into being, saying that she also wants the caucus to work on having proposals ready if the Democrats take back control of the House in 2018. So they are already working on draft legislation, on proposals. Well, why don't we just go with H.R. 676? But anyway, now she also credits Bernie Sanders here. She said Bernie Sanders putting that out at that high level was a huge step forward. It built the public knowledge that this wasn't a crazy progressive idea. Well, no, it turns out that most progressive ideas are not just not crazy, they're also incredibly popular. For example, as I said before, Medicare for all itself. It's got, according to a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll, 59% of respondents want a government-run healthcare system. That's not, there's no ambiguity here. That's not saying, oh, public option or anything like that. No. We want the government to run healthcare. Just saying. And you have a majority of Americans in favor of that. But then, of course, you also have other progressive ideas that are incredibly popular. Living wage, free college tuition for public universities, et cetera, right? Now, as far as Medicare for all goes in the polling, I think the more people know and learn about that plan, the better. And they have to learn about the actual facts of the plan and not about the propaganda. The propaganda is already strong. You have centrists and you have members of the right wing screaming about how socialism is so terrible. Oh my God. It's socialized medicine. We're going to have rationing of care. Well, look at all the other countries that actually do. In fact, we're the lone country that doesn't have a single-payer healthcare system. And you know what? let me tell you something. Rationing already exists. It just, look, if you don't have the money, then by definition, you can't go to the doctor. By definition, you are being rationed. You are being denied care because you don't have the means to be able to pay for that care. So, what's a worse system? Look, we right now have a system that we spend more per person on healthcare in this country than anywhere else. And what do we get for it? We actually get less than everybody else. We have worse outcomes. We have higher infant mortality rates. We have a lower life expectancy. There are a lot of people with preventable, that have gotten sick with things that they could have prevented had they had access, not just access, but had they had guaranteed health care. And we call ourselves the best in the world. No. Look, there are even some studies, and you want to talk about the cost, because that's what they do, right? Oh, it's going to cost so much. No, according to some studies, Medicare-for-all would save us $17 trillion over the next 10 years. Why? It's because we already spend an insane amount on our current for-profit system. Why? It's because it's inefficient and is based on executive profits. And what are they going to do in order to make more profit? They're going to charge more. Eliminate that profit motive, and then suddenly you can clamp down on the costs quite efficiently. All they care is about profits. That's why it's an immoral system. And that's why we need to replace it. And look, I think it's great that we're seeing a lot of politicians. We're seeing Medicare for All becoming a major platform plank. We're seeing it become mainstream. And it's because of the work of tireless progressives, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Keith Ellison, Pramila Jayapal, all these different politicians that are pushing this into the mainstream. And all the voters who voted for people who want to push this into the mainstream. It's because of you guys that we're having success. That said, we are a long way from actually implementing this as policy or getting to the point where we can even vote on being able to implement it as policy. Nonetheless, this is a good step. We should definitely be pushing for this more, because I think at the end of the day, we're going to get it. Okay. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I've got another story, but I think I'll save that for tomorrow, since it's not really relevant to the day. So we'll come back tomorrow. We'll do that story plus some others. If you guys have any suggestions, obviously let me know about that through Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And sometimes I might not see them, so don't get discouraged. Just keep sending it. If you have a great story, let me know. All right. As far as that goes, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching, going around the nation with me today. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for, of course, all the chat and things like that. So that's it. Thanks, everybody. I love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night to you, Nation. See you guys tomorrow.